Hello, good evening, good afternoon to everyone who is watching us. Thank you so much for tuning in to yet again our wonderful live stream. So, in case you still have to grab some water, or in case someone you know will wanna join the live stream and they are gonna go and be here in 5-10 minutes, let them know that they can still join us through YouTube and LinkedIn because we will be streaming on both of them. So as usual, we have prepared a Slido with a question to get to know you better. Please feel free to just scan the code here or use the code on my right hand. That's 11 19 88 4. That's just a small, tiny little icebreaker. We would also love to know where you are watching us from. So if you want to share which city, which country you are joining our live stream from, just leave it in the comments and we will take a look at it. We're just really curious to see how many people and where are you connecting and joining us from. So, did you scan it? Have you scanned it? Yeah, cool. Okay, cool. So today we welcome James Gunaca, who is joining us to talk about developing our experimentation mindset. James has a 20-year plus career in product management and digital marketing. He has worked as a product leader in companies like Amazon and ExpressVPN across the United States and Europe. He has built and led multiple product teams who have delivered global 0 to 1 hardware products like Amazon Echo with the Alexa AI assistant. James is also a career coach for PMs on a mission to make better products around the world by helping professionals develop and grow their careers in product management. James, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today here in the Product People live stream.
Thank you so much for having me.
A little bit about myself. I'm Adriana. You can call me Adri. I am a lawyer turned product manager. I have over 2 years of experience in product management, and my main fields of expertise are actually legal compliance and change management. I love that there are so many skills, transferable skills from my law practice into product management. And turns out I have met a lot of lawyers that have also become product managers in the last years. So maybe I'm not the only one, maybe it's a trend, who knows? So a little bit also about Product People for those who have joined us and don't know us that much yet. What we do is we offer interim product management, product leadership, and product ops services through 42 in-house employees. And this is basically how we make our money. We have a mission of sharing our knowledge generously, and this is how we give back to our community. We curate free events and talks for one of Europe's largest PM communities with over 33,000 members. So you're a part of this. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's continue to just share our love for product things everywhere. Whoop, I lost my mouse. There we go. Okay, so back to the Slido. The question is this one. How many experiments have you run in your career? If you have already scanned the code, if you haven't, here you go. I'm curious to see how many experiments have you run in your careers. I am pretty sure James refers to experimentation as in trying new things. I, however, as a lawyer, I think the last time I had any close experience to experimentation was in 6th grade in primary school when I had to build up a paper mache paper. Is that the same in English?
Mhm.
Volcano. Yeah, that's the closest.
Paper mache, yes.
There we go. So I think that's the last time I ever had like a hands-on experimentation by scientific definition. But yeah, being a lawyer can be kind of boring.
Those are
So
the fun types of experiments that hopefully inspired people to think about what they could be doing to learn and test things as they grow older. I'm surprised though. I would think that lawyers as well would want to make sure that they have the right information to make decisions. Although at the same time, maybe there's not a lot of opportunities to experiment with things in the legal space.
that would be an accurate perception. Actually, I found in my experience that lawyers can be quite risk averse. It's you're always, if anything, you're actually very conservative regarding risk. You don't want your clients assuming any potential liability. So I would risk saying that at least traditional law practice, it's not very experimental. which is so fun that I joined product, because product gives you far more space to do this from to do this. Okay, so we have some answers coming in. 8% of our audience have answered that they have run at least between 1 and 50 experiments in their careers. You go, people. This is awesome. We have a bunch of people, 10%, that say that they have gone between 51 and 100. We actually have 0 people that have done within the third option, which is 101 to 500. But we have 10% that have gone over 500 experiments. So you go, Einsteins. This is this is great. Okay,
Amazing.
let's just, the Slido will continue to be open, everyone. So please just drop by, leave us your answer there. If you can't access the Slido for any reason, leave it in the comments. We keep an eye on them. Okay, so without any further ado, thank you so much, James, for being here. Can't wait to hear you. So I'll just give it to you.
Thank you, Adriana, for that introduction, and thank you to product people for having me here. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, both to advance the practice of product management, but also connecting people from here in Europe as well as around the world. And lastly, I really want to thank all of those who are here watching live, and hello to those who may be watching this on demand in the future. And as she said, if you haven't already, make sure to drop some questions in the Slido. I'll definitely be sticking around after the presentation to chat with you all. But I want to go ahead and dig in and just start by kind of asking folks out there a question. Have you ever really wondered why, some of the most amazing products you've used, or maybe the ones you consider to be your favorites, make you excited and want to talk to other people about them? If you think the secret is something like unlimited resources or just incredible product sense, I think you might be happy to know that it's really not because of any of those one things. Building amazing products, I think, rarely happens by accident, but all amazing products don't really ever start out that amazing. These products that we love and that are our favorites, they're perfected through a mindset of continuous experimentation and learning. And so today, I'm going to share with you how an experimentation mindset can equip you to address difficult and ambiguous problems, but also help you to convert confusion and anxiety into some more like excitement and determination. And ideally, this leads you to better results, your products, at work, in your career, and perhaps even beyond. As Adriana said, I'm James Gunaca, and I've spent over 20 years in product, tech, and marketing across different parts of the United States, also different parts of Europe, where I now live in the UK. And I've been leading and developing and coaching countless product managers. I've also had the fortune of launching and scaling some incredible products, like Amazon Echo with the Alexa AI assistant, category-leading mobile app for a fitness chain back in the United States. And I've also worked on privacy and security products like ExpressVPN. And there's more. But throughout my career, I've been developing and then leveraging my experimentation mindset to deliver outcomes that have really propelled these products forward. And hopefully, I like to think, provided customers experiences that they really love. Now, in terms of that survey, by now I've conducted well over 1,000 experiments, but I haven't always had this really strong mindset when it came to experimentation. If I think back to the very first product I worked on and that I built, it's painfully obvious to me now that a lack of an experimentation mindset had an impact, not really just on how successful I was as an individual, but on the product itself. And so the first product I ever worked on was a mobile app for that fitness chain I mentioned earlier in the United States. They're called 24-Hour Fitness. Now, this is way back in 2008 at the dawn of the App Store. And I remember being in a meeting with the then chief marketing officer, marketing leadership team, and I was coming at it from a consultancy. And we were discussing, whether the app we wanted to build should focus on serving existing customers or prospective customers. While I had run some experiments in the past, this kind of led me to suggest, let's just launch something that could be used by both, and we'll find out. And for some reason that worked. But there was no clear hypothesis that was set. There was no definition of what success would look like for that app. As you can probably guess, this was not an effective strategy. It meant that we lacked focus. And then it showed as, we built something that was confusing for customers. But here's a look at what we shipped to customers. On the left, you can see there's a free 7-day pass. This is all about acquiring customers. In the middle is a screen around finding classes, group fitness classes, either by schedule or by instructor. Really, that's only relevant for existing members. And on the right, you've got refer a friend, also something specific to members. And then you've got some social media links, which was growing quite substantially at the time. Now, to those of you looking at this UX and thinking it looks shitty, that's because it's obviously very, very bad by today's standards. But remember, this was 2008, and this is how apps looked at the time. Now, we've obviously come a long way since then. And, there was no defined approach to how we would test this app or what we would measure. We agreed in principle that we would test, but this didn't go anywhere near far enough. And this lack of an experimentation mindset meant that, we were debating several months later, should we have even built this application? Was it the right investment? As we're still trying to serve two different groups of customers with no clear outcome about what we were trying to achieve. And can you imagine today if a company like that, with thousands of locations around a country would be debating whether or not to have a mobile app or if it was worth it? I don't think that debate would be happening the same today. So let's talk about the experimentation mindset. What is it? Well, here's how I define it. The systematic approach to testing and learning, and then enhancing your ability to innovate, adapt, and drive continuous improvement. But I want to break that down a bit further and explain what I mean. So first, a systematic approach to testing and learning. But whenever we encounter problems, choices we have to make, this really is an opportunity to determine both what options we have, or you can come up with some new options. But ultimately, we end up making a decision, right? And perhaps we end up learning something that we reflect on after, but that's not always the case. The experimentation mindset is also going to help you innovate, though, right? Coming up with new ideas or leveraging ideas from others to make something new, right? As PMs, we don't always come up with the best ideas ourselves. Then you also learn to adapt, right? When you're innovating, when you're testing and you're experimenting, you're going to collect information, and that information is going to inform some future choices. And those may lead you down a different path than you expected. And maybe you don't get the outcome that you want, but you learn something along the way. And so finally, I think people benefit the most from this ability to drive continuous improvement. So when we approach decision-making and problem solving, as product managers, through this lens of always improving, we're more likely to take, again, incremental steps towards making our products work better, feeling rewarded when we improve or beat a goal, and hopefully, be at peace a bit with the reality that certainly in product management, there's no end state and there's no finish line. So to help illustrate my point, I want to share another story. I helped launch the original Amazon Echo back in 2015. And we established this voice-controlled smart speaker market. At the time, there was no direct competitors. A few years later, though, after that product had experienced rapid growth, we scaled the product around the world. We had multiple iterations of the hardware. I found myself in a very high stakes and challenging situation. At the time, my team owned the customer purchase experience, and I needed to build and deliver an experimentation roadmap that was aimed at solving a declining growth rate. And this was happening following the introduction of our then primary competitor, Google, with their Google Home and the Google Home Mini. You can imagine the stakes were quite high. So I had authored and gotten buy-in on this really aggressive conversion rate goal, and it got set at the senior vice president level for all of Amazon devices. And so here's what that looked like in 2018. We needed to get this conversion rate up to that green line, hit our sales target, and hopefully maintain our competitive advantage. And I remember, being in a room with multiple directors and VPs at Amazon who, oversaw hundreds of employees with hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. And they were looking at me to guide what product and tech changes should be made to address this problem and meet this goal that, I had proposed that we set for ourselves. But this was like many years, hundreds of experiments later, where I'd really honed, my experimentation mindset. And because I had a much more developed mindset at the time, I could rigorously prioritize and manage the conversations and those expectations with very senior level stakeholders. I ended up trimming a group of over 50 test ideas down to like manageable chunks. And then eventually, by making sure we were working on the right things, not testing too much at once or too many overlapping experiments and whatnot. And then even though sometimes it was quite painful in the short term, spoiler, like we didn't actually make it to the top of that green line. In the end, it paid off. All the work that we did that year had an effect on the entire organization's culture of experimentation, and it shifted. And as a result, that put us on a path to achieving even greater results the following year that not only propelled the Amazon Echo business forward, but the entire Amazon devices business, because some of the experiments that we were doing helped inform what was happening elsewhere across the business. But, I get it. A lot of times I hear, oh, that's big tech, right? How can that possibly apply to startups, scale ups? I hear this refrain quite frequently from the people that I talk to. But here's what I want everybody to know. An experimentation mindset, it's not limited by or dependent on the scale of your company or the amount of resources that you have or what tech you have. It's a mindset, and you apply it based on the circumstances that you're in, under the constraints that exist around you. Startups that succeed are able to do so precisely because, they experiment, they prototype, they gather feedback, they iterate. You just don't hear most of their stories, probably because, those teams are busy working, they're finding product market fit, and they're scaling. When I was the head of product for experimentation and growth teams at ExpressVPN, we were facing some financial challenges last year, and we needed to increase our revenue growth. Now, at a scale up, which I would define as a company that's been around for a few years, hundreds to 1,000 employees, a scale up that's run purely as a subscription business, there were only a few things that we could do to grow revenue: get more customers, turn less customers, change our prices. Now, getting more customers, right? That requires money. That requires marketing investment. Turning less customers, but it's incredibly hard. Changing your prices or raising them, like on the surface, that seems a bit easier. And so that's what we decided to do. Here's a look at what our prices were in the UK when we started. And these hadn't changed since the company was founded more than a decade earlier. And so I want to talk with you about how I, put my experimentation mindset to work. It really started with a very clear problem: increase revenue. Right? And then it's forming hypotheses. And the one we landed on was like increasing our prices could increase revenue. But we also had to define some constraints, like how high could we increase prices, thus increasing revenue, while keeping churn below a defined threshold. We also put together a very clear timeline outlining the key checkpoints to analyze results. And then we communicated our plan very clearly, providing founders, the executive team, and other people in the company who were involved plenty of opportunity to weigh in, but also understand what was happening. And then we then executed with a very high degree of scrutiny from everybody. But then we measured the results, not just the conversion, but also customer feedback and sentiment. What was happening online after we started rolling out these experiments? beyond just our business, what was happening externally in the industry. Our primary competitor had raised prices earlier in the year. But while this whole experiment was underway, they rolled back their prices because of customer feedback. So obviously, this was something that we were thinking a lot about. But in the end, in terms of the way we approached this, we landed on increasing our prices by about 20% without exceeding our threshold for increased churn. And these price changes were then rolled out across the customer base later in the year. And so applying my experimentation mindset, and of course others involved, meant that we started with a clear problem to solve, formulated our hypotheses, documented what our approach would be, as well as the constraints that we had. And we brought in the right people, at the right times, and we measured results. And this was all done like under a number of circumstances that were challenging. Profitability and growth were top of mind, changing prices for the very first time since the company had launched over a decade earlier, a period of economic uncertainty, other subscription businesses changing their prices like Netflix and Disney Plus and other changes people were making. So like what was different, in a couple of those examples from early on? Like how did I go from making finger in the wind decisions under the guise of, we'll just measure and see what happens, to then convincing some very senior leaders that I knew what the hell I was doing and, making sure, we didn't ruin a business by raising prices during a time of economic uncertainty or materially affect the business in a bad way. And it comes down to just a couple of different things I want to walk you through. First is just, really building a solid foundation and knowing some of the fundamentals of experiments, and what goes into what I have called like the experimentation toolbox. So what are some of those fundamentals? Well, like number one, this is the obvious stuff, like types of experiments that you can run. Many people I'm sure here are familiar with A/B testing. You're familiar with multivariate testing perhaps, but also prototyping and usability testing. And there's more. Then like, how do you then set up those experiments? How do you form your hypotheses? How do you define your success metrics? How do you also do the design? And then when it comes time to running your experiments, you've got your execution, you've got, data collection, making sure that it's accurate, making sure that you've got data integrity as well as security, especially when, changing things that have to do with customer data. And then when you're done, like analyzing the results, how do you interpret the data? How do you make decisions? How do you iterate based on feedback or what you learned along the way? And that toolbox I mentioned, right? There's a couple things that would go into it. Some of these are more common, but you need to be able to properly estimate your sample sizes, right? So there's sample size calculators, which you can search for online or use in Excel. And there's prototyping tools, right? This can be Figma or Sketch or Miro. Some people even use PowerPoint to do rough wireframes, or you can draw it. For hardware, you've got Raspberry Pis, you've got Arduinos, you've got breadboards. And if you're working on digital products, there's experimentation platforms. You've got Optimizely, VWO, Mixpanel, there's many others. But then like sort of the next big component is like instituting a culture of experimentation by creating artifacts, right? Writing things down, creating records that will detail the various aspects of an experiment, debates or decisions you've made. And this isn't just like for you or for your manager or for your team, but it's for others to read as well and to leave behind information so that it doesn't get lost, when you aren't there, or it can be available when you're away. Next really is like knowing how to work with different stakeholders. As PMs, we work with a ton of different stakeholders and partners. You've got designers, engineers, marketers, finance, legal, HR, your manager, your founders, the list goes on. You kind of need to know when to get them involved and when to keep like some of them out of the room. If you think about it across the life cycle of an experiment, in the discovery stage, like bring everyone in. When it's time to execute, just the core team. When it's time to share the learnings, like bring everybody back. Also should be aware of like common pitfalls, as well as like knowing how to avoid them. A couple of examples, right? Experimenting too much. this can lead to experimentation fatigue, right? Not properly planning. I think jumping right into running an experiment is possibly the quickest route to failure. Not having a well-formed hypothesis or determining how you're going to measure success. Collecting too much data is another one. Like, data is great, but too much of it leads to analysis paralysis, as you've probably heard. Another common pitfall, like looking at results early. I think anyone who's run a number of experiments has probably been in a conversation with some senior leader who wants to take a peek and see how things are trending. This is a trap. Try not to do it. And then trying to measure multiple outcomes at the same time, right? If you're trying to, think about that example I shared earlier. Oh, well, we'll do it for prospective customers and current customers. Well, like, the results might be at odds with each other. So how do you decide? So trying to measure too many things at once, another pitfall. And then letting the lack of experimentation opportunities stop you or think that there's nothing that you can be experimenting with. I would challenge everyone to think about, what could I be testing, even if you feel like the opportunities aren't clear. And then another common pitfall to avoid is like not considering the cost of failed experiments. So again, thinking through, all right, if you're changing things that could affect conversion or could affect revenue, maybe you had a winning treatment that increased revenue by $500,000 over a month, but you had 5 other experiments before that all failed, and the collective results of those experiments, drove a negative revenue impact of like $250,000, right? So your net outcome is like $250,000, not $500,000. And if you focus just on the positives and the winning treatments, and you either downplay or discount or don't include the calculation of the negative ones, it's only a matter of time before you get called out for it, because you should be looking at the totality of experimentation results. Then finally, being able to identify what are called high-value decisions, and then being equipped with the right decision-making frameworks that you can use to make those decisions. What do I mean by high-value decisions? Right, these involve making a choice that's going to have material implications on a business or an individual, and that includes you, right? You could be thinking about high-value decisions about your career. As for frameworks, right, there's some you're probably familiar with. There's SWOT analysis, cost benefit, pros, cons. If you went to business school, these will be familiar. But there's others. There's one called 6 Thinking Hats I learned about. There's one-way door, two-way door decisions. This is a common one at Amazon. And there's obviously more. That's just the high-level summary of what I think constitutes an experimentation mindset, as well as some of the things for you to think about as you develop yours. I want to leave everybody with this. An experimentation mindset will help you innovate and solve problems, no matter the product or the size of the company. But you do have to work on it over time to realize some of those benefits. And you have to be intentional about it. But the good news is, you can realize those benefits, right? On any product, any company, or throughout your career, and even your personal life. Right? Experimentation can play a role and lead to better outcomes. I'm sure many of you who went to university experimented with different, for example, elective courses, right? That's a form of experimentation. You set out to learn something and tried something new. You collected the data and you made a decision as a result. Right? So you could be thinking about this beyond just for your products. And there's more good news, right? It is now easier than ever to learn. And just by being here, right, and watching this, you've taken a good step. And if you want to go further, and realize more of those benefits of an experimentation mindset, or maybe develop some of your own success stories, I teach people how to build and grow their experimentation mindset. This is really just a sample of what that looks like. So, if you want to learn more, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a DM, right? Let's talk. I'm certainly open, welcome anyone to reach out. And if you want to develop your experimentation mindset, generate some of those success stories I talked about, you can check out the course that I do on Maven. And again, I've really just scratched the surface today. There's a whole lot more. And I go hands-on with people, again, build and develop their mindsets either with situations they're facing at their job or throughout their careers. So I do want to thank you all again for joining me today. And I do want to thank product people for the opportunity. I'm happy to hang around and answer any questions. And again, just, yeah, I wanted to thank you all so much for the time.
Thank you so much, James. Let's jump in right into the QA. There we go. So, hi everyone again, it's me. If you would like to ask a question to James, which I am sure you would, we can use the same code, the same QR code as well in Slido. We'll be collecting the questions, so just scan this. If you had Slido already opened on your laptop, tablet, or phone, you can use the same one. There is the MIA there for you to drop questions for James. And while we wait for your questions to arrive, why don't we just tell you more about Proud People? I mean, come on, you're here. Let's do this. So, in case you're wondering when to call us, there are 3 very simple use cases. If you need an interim or fractional product manager or a product leader, that would be a really good use case for us. We cover permanent positions. We take care of covering for parental leaves, or in case there is an important or urgent initiative in your team, we can also join and help you with that. We can also join teams as product coaches or consultants or program managers or product ops. And we can also join the teams in to help with product discovery. So plenty of options here. There are a bunch of B2C clients that you maybe know that we have already worked with. So Zalando, for example, Omio, Blinkist, the Back Market, lots of them. We have worked with several different industries so far as B2C and B2B. And just to throw you some numbers, there is 300 cross-functional teams that we have supported so far, over 70 clients from Series A startups to publicly listed companies. I wish I could disclose more names, but I can't. We have over 42 product leaders and product managers that are in-house, full-time, like me. We love to do this for a living. And some fun fact, because it's 2024 and this obviously always mattered, but now matters more than ever, we have 62%, 66% of women in our leadership. We are extremely compromised with pushing women representation, diversity in STEM and product spaces. So yeah, love it. Now back to the Q&A. If you haven't dropped your questions, please feel free to do so. Again, if there is any reason why Slido is not working for you, please just do it. Drop your questions on the comments in YouTube or LinkedIn, and we will catch them and read them. So let's take a look, because I think we have some. Yeah, there we go. So our first question for you, James, is: I am operating in a feature factory and founder-led development where research and validation isn't a priority. Do you have any tips on how to pitch the value of experiments in this situation?
Yes, I do. So I do think you're going to need buy-in from senior leaders on the value of experimentation. And you probably want to try to find areas where maybe you learn things because you didn't experiment that cost you something. So if you think about it, maybe you launched something that had poor reception by customers, or it didn't kind of meet the objectives that you had set out, at the onset. And so these create sort of points of friction that you can be using to surface up to say, okay, well, what can we do next time to maybe prevent something like that from happening, or to be better prepared when we launch? And that's sort of your opportunity then to propose experimentation as a means of achieving that. And the thing I like to emphasize a lot is experimentation does not have to be just running A/B tests or more complicated experiments. And so that's where a lot of people's minds will initially go when you say, oh, I want to run an experiment. They think, oh, A/B test. They think, oh, control tests, holdouts. Sounds really complicated to set up. But if you take a step back, it's more of, okay, no, it's just making sure that we're being iterative in our way of discovering if what we're doing or what decisions we're making, how are we going to know if they're going to be successful, and what can we change before we get too far down the line that it's going to be too costly. So for founders, right, making investments and making big strategic decisions that turn out to be failures or not work out successfully are the points to kind of like try to slide in with, hey, I think we should try running an experiment, or I think we should introduce some new mechanism to iterate before we launch things to customers.
Thank you for the insight. We have a second question coming your way. So this person shares with us that they have started to see some machine learning used in tandem with experiments run by product teams. Perhaps you have spotted any trends in different data science techniques. Are you seeing any of these?
Yeah, interesting question. Again, I'll draw on some experience about this with ExpressVPN. So we had ML teams, and one of the things they were focused on was trying to predict customers who would churn. And then we would try to understand what do we do with kind of like these lists of customers who have a propensity to churn. And so like ML wasn't necessarily a means of deciding what we should do for customers to prevent them from churn. It was more of like a predictive way of identifying customers perhaps earlier in their journey who had a likelihood to churn. And then it was on to like other product and marketing teams to figure out, now what do we do and what changes can we make? And how do we segment these customers so we can understand how well this model is at predicting that they'll actually churn, and what things we can change that can actually prevent or mitigate that churn. If there was a question, I hope that sort of gives some insight into what they're asking for. But I think there's like another way people might be thinking about this, which would be, how can ML be used to maybe generate different variations of things to test? And if that was sort of the angle they were coming at it from, I have less direct experience of having done that. But I do think, the general data science measurement methodologies, aren't changing substantially, right? There's just access to more data. There is the ease of collecting more data, which again is something to watch out for, right? There was this appetite for people to like measure more things, and maybe you set one success metric, but because you track 10 other things, now when you're evaluating results, maybe you find some other thing within that 10 different sets of data that you like. But if that's not what you set out to change or to measure, it's a risk to make decisions based on some of that, tertiary data points that you maybe were collected. So I would caution people against, trying to use, too many data points outside of what you set out for as a risk.
That actually ties in perfectly with the next question we have, which is, how can product managers approach the analysis of multiple concurrent experiments to avoid interactions and confounding results across experiments? What happens when we experiment too much?
Yeah, let's take a look at that one. So how to approach the analysis of multiple concurrent experiments. So I think the important thing to do when designing your experiments is to think about where there's potential to be affecting a customer in a journey. And so again, when I talked about the example earlier for Echo, right, we had multiple stages in the customer journey, from visiting the homepage to visiting the product detail page to adding something to cart, checkout. And so there's like all these different steps. And so we understood that like there could be so many different things happening across different stages in that process that have nothing to do with the core behavior we're trying to affect. And so we felt, as long as the things that we're changing aren't materially close in the context of like what the customer is doing at a single point in time, like down to like the seconds, then it's okay to be running multiple experiments concurrently. I'll illustrate that with kind of like, okay, you're on a product page for Amazon. You've got, your image, you've got your bullet points in the middle, and you got your buy box on the right. You probably wouldn't want to be changing elements across those three areas, interdependently or at the same time, unless it's a controlled experiment where you're running multi-variations or multi-variants, and like you're able to segment all those different pieces together, which gets really complicated. We wouldn't run, an experiment on the images and experiment on the buy box at the same time if they were set up differently. But if it was like something happening up top, and then, hey, maybe we also change something in the comparison chart way down below, or we could test on desktop as one experience and mobile as another, like that was okay. Those were things that we felt confident about because the differences in customer behavior would kind of be within the noise anyway. And so it wouldn't be something where we felt like we were materially changing, the customer experience. So like think about it through those different steps of the journey, whether that be screens you have in an app. And if it's like, I'm at this specific step, try not to change too many things at once, unless you're controlling for all those different variations within the setup of a single experiment.
Mhm. I hope this person had the question answered because I think that was pretty interesting. To me, that was my favorite question so far.
It's a
We
good
have
one.
another one. Can you share any more techniques and frameworks and how you go about user segmentation to gain more granular insights?
All right, techniques and frameworks for user segmentation. I'll go back again to the ExpressVPN story that I shared. One of the things that we tried to do was, so let me step back. Like they've got millions of customers, many different countries around the world. And so when we were thinking about, all right, how do we define a customer segment or cohort to experiment with? There's all these different attributes we could look at. How long have they had a subscription? What country do they live in? How frequently do they use the product? And so we tried to land on sort of a cluster. Oh, and yeah, when is their actual renewal coming up, which is the point in time in which you can actually test changing prices. And so we tried to identify a group of customers that would be enough, have a sample size large enough to detect meaningful difference. And that was kind of like number one, is just making sure that you're going to have a large enough sample size to meaningfully understand a change in behavior. You don't have to have really large sample sizes depending on how big of a change you're making. So we started there. Next was, how do we maybe identify a group of customers that is a representation of the larger customer segment? Because again, we'd be changing prices for everybody. So we didn't want to be too narrow in our customer profile because we wanted it to be representative of the whole. And that might not always be true depending on what you're trying to test with. Maybe you're trying to test for things that just have to do with, customers who, buy the most expensive version of your product versus the cheapest version of your product if you have different sort of pricing scales. And so, yeah, I think one of the techniques is about just, again, trying to understand who is the customer you're trying to affect change for or drive a different change in behavior, and then find a customer segment that sort of reflects that, or not be specific about it at all and say, let's just focus on a randomized population. And that's okay too. And that's actually most of what the experiments that we did that I described for Amazon was, we had hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of samples. And so if we were trying to make a change that affected all of them, we didn't need to sub-segment down because we wouldn't then do anything different if we were to sub-segment. So that's another good thought that I had. Don't sub-segment if you're not going to be changing things per segment. So sometimes, in sort of the ideation phase of experimentation, people come up with ideas like, oh, well, should we maybe test this on mobile or maybe just for iOS versus Android? Should we test this, for this browser versus that browser, or for this country versus that country? The thing to be conscious of is if you found yourself in a situation where let's do the country example, right? So maybe things go great in the US, but they go terrible in the UK for whatever experiment treatment you're doing. So that can create, one of two problems. Either one, you're now saying we're going to now create two iterations of our experience based in the US and the UK. That can be very costly. Or it could be that now you're trying to decide, should I launch this even though I know it makes my business worse in one country versus the other? And so if you're not going to be making changes based on different segmentation or different segments of customers, then my guidance would be like, don't try to separate your test results by those different segment definitions, right? Because if you're not going to make any different changes as a result, then it probably shouldn't be something that you segment for testing.
To be honest, that makes sense. Okay, we have someone who's sharing with us that they are developing a playbook to help product managers understand when to experiment and how. Could you share advice on how to build this playbook?
Of course. And whoever this is, send me a message or connect with me. I would love to know more about this playbook. I'm always looking for ways in which I can learn from others and maybe contribute to things that help other people. So, advice to build this playbook. Outside of the things that I've shared so far today, which feel free to incorporate them into your playbook as you see fit, I would say think about like the stages of the product management lifecycle where it's important to run experiments. And so I didn't get into this today, but if you think about it in terms of like the discovery phase, you've got your sort of, you're doing your strategy and then you're doing product delivery. I would say like on the ends is where you want to be focusing on your experiments, right? So discovery, this is rapidly iterating, creating prototypes, getting feedback from customers, doing usability tests, collecting data that way to then inform the strategic decisions you're going to make for your product, like what's going to go in your V1 or what's going to go in this next launch that you're going to do versus what do you still need to kind of iterate on before making it ready or available for all customers. Then once you've delivered, what tweaks can you be making so that customers get more value out of that product? How can you collect data from the product that's out there to then inform future product development that you do? So yeah, I would think about that like, what sort of stage in the product lifecycle should experimentation play a role? The next is just some of the best practices. I only touched on it, but I do think, and I tell people, and we actually spend time creating these in the course I mentioned, like creating experimentation artifacts. This can be a one pager that just kind of defines what are you experimenting? What are you intending to learn? What does success look like? What's the best possible outcome that you would expect from this experiment? What's the worst possible outcome that could happen? So you can plan to mitigate it if you need to. And so you kind of have a snapshot of a point in time of your perception, or you get too far down the experimentation life cycle, right? And where you kind of lose some of that initial perspective on things. And then creating artifacts when the experiment is over, right? How does that compare to what was learned or what was expected? What maybe did you experience along the way that could inform other experiments? I think this is really good because when you're coming up with ideas to experiment with, you're not like actually building those iterations. But when you get in there and you build or you're executing and you got it in front of customers, you're collecting more information along the way. It may not change the outcome of that experiment, but maybe it's going to affect something else for some other team. So creating artifacts, distributing those artifacts, not just celebrating in the results when it works out well, but also sharing the learnings that can inform other teams, help them sort of reach better outcomes over time would be something else I would suggest going in your playbook.
I would like to read that playbook too, honestly. We have one more question. I think this will be, the last question. So I think it's a different flavor of the first one we got, which makes it really interesting. Over the course of running over 1,000 experiments, did you create a repeatable process for finding winning experiments more often?
Yeah, this is a really good one as well. I'm glad I'm glad this was asked. So the short answer is like no. There's no secret to increasing your experimentation win rate. I've shared stats before, and you'll probably encounter these online. Like most experiments, I think it's like over 80% of experiments at companies like Google and Microsoft, and so you could apply this elsewhere, like they fail. They fail to reach their intended outcome. So why do they keep doing it anyway? Well, it's because, again, it's not just about the result of that one experiment, it's about all the things that you learn along the way. Now, there are repeatable processes that I think enable an experiment to be more successful in terms of like the value that it provides the people who are running it and the chance that it has of being successful for the business, right? So one of those things is, understanding experiments that have already been run and what's been learned from those How are they set up? So when I joined a new company, and I was involved in leading experimentation, like the first thing I wanted to understand was what experiments have been run before I start thinking about ideas and investing my time on, hey, what else could we do to, grow the business? What have we already tried? How can I learn about that? And uh, it pains me to say it, but like when I asked that question, I didn't get a lot of information that was helpful. And that kind of frustrated me because I was like, oh man, wouldn't it be nice? This company's been doing this for 10 plus years. They're really successful. There's probably a lot of great learnings. Maybe if I go talk to people, I'll get that information. But it'd have been much easier for me and for other, save time for other people if it more of it had been written down and I could read it and I could absorb that information on my own, hand it off to other people. And so those are the types of repeatable processes that I think will help people have experiments that lead to better outcomes. But those outcomes aren't just about like the metric you're trying to change. It's also the outcomes that matter for your team, for your company, for the culture of your company, which ideally would also lead to better product outcomes too. Great question.
Yeah. I know I said it was going to be the last one, but I have to ask. After
Okay.
all that you have shared with us, is there such a thing as an unsuccessful or a failed experiment?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are times when an experiment fails, and not only does it, fail to reach the expected or the desired outcome, but maybe, something went wrong along the way.
Mhm.
And, there are things that you can look at as like being a failure. So I certainly encourage people to try to find some kind of silver lining or try to find something about that you can take away from an experiment that didn't work out. Like don't agonize over it, right? If it's so sometimes I think this was just gonna like make a reference as cultural reference. There's a TV show called The Office in the United States that many people may be familiar with, but sometimes you could do everything right and you still lose, and sometimes there's not a lesson there. Sometimes you just lose, and you just got to move on. So I think as long as you're thinking about how you can be learning the next time, how you can do something differently the next time, and move on to that next experiment. Don't let failures get out of the way. Especially again, going back to that 80% of them are going to fail. You got to get comfortable with that failure, and just be okay with it and move on to the next thing.
Amazing. I would like to train this mindset too. Thank you so much, James. I think this has been one of my very favorite live streams. I think we can all be benefited from experimentation mindset anywhere and in all areas of our life. So I hope people can reach out to you. I especially hope this person with the playbook reaches out to you. I'm really curious. So yeah, that was James. Thanks everyone. Just before you go, I happen to lead the newsletter at Proud People, so I will feel so good if you just dropped a subscription to our newsletter. I promise it's pretty cool and it's fun. We try to keep it just a month, so you're not gonna be bombarded with information. Next week, please join us with Stefano Rinaldi. We're gonna talk about changing industries as a PM and navigating different product cultures. And with that being said, thank you so much. We have several events upcoming, so check out our LinkedIn, join us, and hope to see you again next week. Thank you so much, James, again. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone for watching and asking thoughtful questions.